It was a bitterly cold night that made even the toughest soul shiver. Logan Carter, a long-haul truck driver used to long stretches of empty highway, wasn't ready for what he found on the side of a remote road in the middle of nowhere. A girl no older than 9 years old, covered in blood and barely able to stand, had fallen down. As Logan rushed to her aid, his heart raced as she held on to him. What happened to her? Who did this? Why was she left to die? Let us know where you're watching in the comments, and if you think that justice should be done and the truth should come to light, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Logan Carter had seen a lot of strange things on the road in his years, like accidents that left drivers stranded and hitchhikers with dead eyes and sad stories, but he had never seen anything like this. The two-lane highway went on forever. His headlights were the only thing cutting through the thick fog that was rolling over the cracked asphalt. He was halfway through his night run, hauling a load of industrial equipment across the state. He was thinking about nothing but the miles ahead when he saw her. At first, he thought it was an animal, a small figure coming out from behind the trees and stumbling into the side of the road. Before he knew what he was doing, his foot hit the brakes, sending his tires screeching against the wet pavement. The girl took one more step forward before falling to the side of the road. Jesus Christ, Logan threw the truck into park and jumped out, his boots crunching against the gravel as he ran toward her. The girl was probably 9 years old or younger, and she was in bad shape. Blood was on the front of her oversized sweatshirt, and dark streaks ran down her pale legs. Her hair was tangled and matted with dirt, and she couldn't hold on as her small body shook. "Hey kid, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, barely registering his voice. She was breathing shallowly. When Logan reached out to check for injuries, his hand brushed against something wet and sticky. Blood had soaked through her sweatshirt, but as he gently peeled it up, his stomach lurched. A bandage was wrapped tightly around her abdomen, fresh and poorly secured, and there were surgical scars underneath it. What the hell? As he scanned her body, his heart rate went up. These weren't random injuries, someone had operated on her. Logan sprang into action and carefully lifted the little girl off the ground. She barely weighed anything, but the stitches were uneven, like they were done quickly, and the area around the cut was red and itchy. This wasn't just a case of a lost child in the woods, someone had cut her up and left her for dead. She let out a weak whimper that was barely above a breath. Her fingers twitched as they tried to hold on to the dirt. "Hang in there, sweetheart," he muttered as he quickly walked toward his truck. Logan put the girl in the passenger seat and turned up the heat. She shivered violently, her small body curling inward, but she never fully regained consciousness. He grabbed his phone and shook his hands as he dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" a female dispatcher asked. "I found a little girl on the side of Highway 16, Logan said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "She's badly hurt, she has fresh stitches, and she's lost a lot of blood." The dispatcher's tone became stern. "Sir, can you confirm her condition? Is she okay?" Responding barely, he said, "She's ice cold and needs a damn hospital. The nearest facility is St. Mary's Memorial, which is about 60 miles from your location. Can you transport her?" "I'm already driving," Logan said, stepping on the gas harder to get them ready. "Do you know what happened to her?" the dispatcher asked, and Logan clenched his jaw. "No, but I'm going to find out," he said. As Logan sped into the drop-off zone, he barely had the truck in park. As he rushed into the emergency room, Logan yelled, "Help! I need help over here." Right away, a nurse and a doctor in scrubs ran toward him with a gurney. "What happened?" the nurse asked as they lifted the girl onto the bed. "I found her on the side of the road," Logan said. "She's been cut open and stitched up. I don't know what the hell happened to her." Dr. Evelyn Parker, the attending doctor, pulled back the girl's sweatshirt. Her expression tightened as she looked at the girl. 2 more nurses rushed in and wheeled the girl down the hallway into the trauma wing. Dr. Parker looked at Logan with her sharp brown eyes and asked, "Where exactly did you find her off Highway 16? Logan replied, "Middle of nowhere." Dr. Parker crossed her arms, "And you just happened to be there." This made Logan angry. I'm a truck driver. I saw a kid collapsing on the road. Do you think I had anything to do with this? Logan shook his head and rubbed his head. Dr. Parker's face darkened as he said, Look, Doc, whatever's going on here, it's bad that someone didn't just leave her, they dumped her. That's what I'm afraid of. 20 minutes later, Logan was waiting in the hospital's waiting room when a uniformed officer walked in. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with short, cropped hair and a presence that made people sit up straight. He was Sheriff Dante L.W. Were you the one who brought the girl in? Lawson asked. Yes, Logan replied. Lawson pulled out a notepad and told me everything. Lawson listened with an expression that couldn't be read, then closed his notebook. We checked the hospital's missing persons database, and Lawson said that Lily Dawson, a 9-year-old girl who looked a lot like her, had been reported missing 6 months ago. Dr. Evelyn Parker was used to dealing with trauma cases, but this one was different. The girl lay pale and weak on the hospital bed, her breathing shallow and her forehead sweating, despite the warmth of the room. The monitors kept beeping steadily to keep an eye on her vital signs, but Evelyn's eyes were on the person who did this wasn't a shady butcher, they were skilled and professionally trained. But there was something else wrong, the wound wasn't healing the way it should, and the edges of the cut were getting infected. Evelyn took off her gloves and told the nurse next to her, Get me a new set of scans. I want a full blood panel and imaging on her abdomen. The girl moved a little, her lips splitting as if she were trying to speak. Evelyn whispered, Dear sweetheart, could you tell me your name? The girl's eyelashes fluttered, and Evelyn swallowed hard, barely managing to whisper 2 words, They're coming. The thought sent a chill down Evelyn's spine. Sheriff Dante Lawson walked into the emergency room with a serious air about him. He was broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and unreadable. He scanned the room until he saw Logan Carter sitting in one of the plastic waiting chairs, with his arms crossed over his chest. You the one who brought the... Lawson pulled out a small notepad and clicked his pen. Let's start with the basics. Where exactly did you find her? Logan said out loud. He was tired of repeating himself. Highway 16. She stumbled out of the woods, barely standing. She collapsed before I could even get to her. Lawson looked at him for a long time. And you just happened to be driving by. Logan clenched his jaw. That's what I do, Sheriff, I drive. He leaned forward, his voice growing irritated. You really think I had? Lawson didn't answer right away, he just held his gaze. I don't know what to think, a trucker finding a half-dead kid in the middle of nowhere, just a few days after surgery, sounds like more than just bad luck. Logan shook his head and leaned back. Jesus, I did the right thing by bringing her here, and now you're treating me like a suspect? Lawson didn't flinch, that's my job. Before Logan could argue, the doors to the exam room swung open, and Dr. Parker walked in. She looked grim and said, We need to talk. In the hospital office, Evelyn spread out the x-rays on the backlit screen and pointed to the dark spot on the scan. This girl is missing a kidney, Evelyn said in a professional voice, but there was disgust in her tone. You're saying it was taken out surgically? Logan asked. Yes, Evelyn replied. Recently Lawson let out a slow breath, his features tightening with organ trafficking. Evelyn nodded. And not by amateurs, whoever did this knew what they were doing. Lawson slapped his notebook shut, thinking, what kind of monster does that to a kid? Evelyn folded her arms and said, I don't understand why they left her alive. If this was an illegal transplant, they would have risked keeping her around. Logan looked at the x-rays again, his mind racing. Maybe something went wrong, maybe she wasn't supposed to live. Evelyn shook her head, I doubt it. She was stitched up, and someone wanted her to recover, at least for a little while. Logan looked at Lawson and asked, Do you still think I had something to do with this? Lawson stared at him for a long time. To Logan's surprise, the sheriff let out a sigh of relief. No, he said. But that means whoever did this is still out there. Evelyn tapped the scan, and they'll want their money back. Who could be cruel enough to do this to a child? How can Logan Parker and Lawson find them before it's too late? Hit like and keep watching to find out. The hospital room was dark, and the monitors were humming softly. Logan carefully walked in, not sure why he felt drawn back here, but unable to leave. The girl was awake and lying still, her big, haunted eyes fixed on the ceiling and her tiny hands gripping the thin hospital blanket. Her body was tense, as if she were waiting for something or someone. Logan hesitated, then cleared his throat. "Hey kid," she said, her breath catching as she turned to look at him. "My name is Logan, and I found you," he said, pulling up a chair next to her bed. There was silence for a long time, and then she swallowed hard and tightened her grip on the blanket. "They're coming," she whispered again. Logan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "Who's coming?" the girl asked. "The ones who took me down the hall," she replied. Sheriff Lawson's radio crackled. "Sheriff, you need to see this." The voice of a deputy stationed at the hospital's entrance said. Lawson looked at Logan and motioned for him to follow. The two men walked down the hall to the security desk, where a nurse stood pale-faced and pointed at the computer screen. Sheriff Dante Lawson didn't believe in coincidences, especially not in situations like this. He stood in the hospital security office and watched the screen where the nurse had erased all the patient records related to the girl. The intake report, blood work, and even the x-rays that showed her missing kidney had been erased, making it look like she had never been there. Lawson turned to the security officer and felt a knot form in his stomach. If this was deleted a long time ago, it was erased less than an hour ago by someone with high-level access. Lawson swore under his breath and pulled out his radio. "I want the names of every hospital employee who logged into the system in the last 2 hours." The nurse at the desk looked scared. "Sheriff, do you think someone here is helping whoever took her, or are they cleaning up after them?" Lawson's jaw tightened. "I need all security footage from the last 6 hours showing any unknown personnel in the..." He had a feeling that the hospital wasn't safe anymore and that if they had been there before, they'd be back. Logan Carter wasn't good at waiting around. He had spent most of his life on the road, dealing with his own problems and staying out of other people's, but he couldn't leave this. As he sat in the dimly lit waiting area, he could feel Lawson's suspicion still lingering on him. He knew that truckers didn't exactly have a reputation for being perfect, but he wasn't the bad guy here, and the fact that... He sighed and pulled out his phone to look into what was going on. First, he looked at the news. There had been no missing person reports matching Lily's description in the last few days, and there were no accident reports or Amber Alerts. That didn't make sense. A child didn't just disappear and reappear without anyone looking for her. Next, he looked into reports of organ trafficking in the area. There had been 2 cases in the last 6 months, both involving missing teens found dead in abandoned buildings missing vital organs. Incisions were clean and precise, and both cases were labeled as gang activity. Logan frowned and said, "That's not gang work, that's a business." He was still reading when his phone rang. It wasn't a caller ID, so he hesitated before answering. A low, mechanical voice came through the walkaway trucker. Logan's grip on the phone tightened, and there was no pause. Then, all of a sudden, the line went dead. Logan let out a slow breath, and his heart hammered. Whoever it was wasn't just cleaning up their mess, they were watching him. Lawson stood in front of the security monitors with his arms crossed as the hospital's IT guy finally played the video. The text said to rewind to the exact moment Lily had been brought in. The screen showed Logan carrying Lily through the emergency doors, with nurses rushing in to calm things down. Lawson barely paid attention to this, though. He had his eyes on the street outside, telling the tech to reverse the feed the minute before he played the video. There, just out of frame, was a black van rolling slowly down the street. Lawson's stomach turned as he thought about that van. Was it already there before Carter pulled up? The tech scanned back further and found that the van had been sitting down the block for 3 minutes before Logan arrived, which meant that they had followed him here. Lawson straightened up and said, "I want a trace on that van, every traffic camera it passed before it got here." As soon as he hung up the phone, his radio crackled, "Sheriff, we've got something else." There's a state highway cam near Route 16, you're going to want to see this. The grainy highway footage wasn't very clear, but it showed Logan's truck driving down Route 16 just before dawn, and the black van following closely behind it. Logan hadn't just found Lily by chance, he was led to her. Lawson let out a sharp breath and stared at the screen. Whoever was driving that van wanted him to find her? The deputy next to him frowned. Why the hell would they do that? Something went wrong. Lawson's voice was low as he thought out loud, maybe they had to dump her. The deputy hesitated, and Lawson's stomach dropped when he realized that if they wanted her back, they'd be back to finish the job in the hospital room. Dr. Evelyn Parker watched as Lily's vital signs spiked erratically. The beeping monitors confirmed what she already knew, the girl's body was rejecting something. She hovered her hands over the incision, her mind racing. The kidney was gone, but something else was happening inside her. Her body was reacting to something she didn't want to be there. Evelyn told the nurse, "We need to move her." The nurse hesitated, but the doctor's voice became firm. The girl jerked awake and looked around the room, her short, scared breaths coming in and out. Evelyn knelt next to her sweetheart and whispered, "We have to go, okay? We're going somewhere safer." Lily's little fingers grabbed the bed sheet, "They're here." A scream came from the hallway, followed by the sound of gunfire. Evelyn's blood was on the floor. Lily's kidnappers were already inside the hospital. The first gunshot was very loud and came from the east wing, followed by a nurse's piercing scream. Dr. Evelyn Parker barely had time to react before the overhead PA system went off, warning of a life code black lockdown. All staff members were told to secure their stations right away. Evelyn turned to Lily, who was already awake and holding on tight to the sheets in fear. She knew the girl could sense what was happening because she could see armed men moving quickly. The attackers' black tactical gear and weapons made it clear that this wasn't a random attack. They weren't robbers, they were here to save Lily. Evelyn yanked up the girl's floor without hesitation and whispered, "Sweetheart, you have to get up, we need to go." Lily obeyed without question. Even though she was in a lot of pain, the girl had been through worse. This was survival. Evelyn's mind raced. There was no way out through the main halls, the stairwell would soon be full of people. The only way out was the service corridor, which she pulled open. Lily got up and put a blanket over her shoulders to hide herself as best she could. But before she could get to the door, it swung open and a masked man stepped in. His eyes locked on Lily, and he said, "Don't move." Logan Carter had been in a lot of bad situations before, like fights at truck stops and highway accidents, and once he was staring down the barrel of a shotgun over a mistaken load delivery. But this was different. Gunfire rang through the hospital, and people ran in different directions while doors slammed shut. Alarms went off, but Logan didn't move. He was standing near the emergency exit, and something was telling him something wasn't right. He turned to look at Lily's room and saw that a man in black tactical gear had just walked in. Logan didn't think, he didn't hesitate, he moved in 3 long strides and was at the doorway, reaching for the nearest object, a metal floor stand. He swung hard, and the metal cracked against the back of the intruder's head, sending him staggering forward. The man barely managed a grunt before falling to the tile. He quickly took the man's gun, made sure it was safe, and slid it into his waistband. More voices shouted orders from the hallway, and more men were coming back out. Evelyn whispered, "Service corridor." Logan nodded and led the way, keeping a tight grip on Lily's small hand. They moved quickly, and Logan took point to check corners and listen for footsteps. The hospital was set up like a maze, with long, sterile halls with doors that all looked the same and emergency stairwells that echoed with every sound. Lily's breaths were shallow. Even though the girl was having a hard time keeping up, she didn't complain or slow down because she knew what was at stake. "Almost there," Evelyn whispered. Logan turned the last corner and saw the service door. A red emergency exit sign shone above it like salvation. The hallway lights flickered for a second, and then went out completely. Lily let out a small gasp. "They're cutting the power," Logan said. "That means the attack wasn't random or sloppy, it was planned." Evelyn whispered. We have to go now, they said, grabbing Logan's arm. Logan pushed forward, slammed the door open, and stalked outside. Two more men in tactical gear stood at the ambulance's bay, both armed and waiting. One of them raised his rifle, and gunfire broke out, but it wasn't aimed at them. It came from the other side of the parking lot, and someone was shooting at the armed men. Sheriff Lawson had arrived as soon as he got the hospital's attack alert. He had barely pulled into the lot when he saw the black SUVs. It wasn't a random attack, he was looking for one person and knew exactly who it was. He hid behind his patrol car and opened fire. The first man fell instantly, and the second ran for cover behind a parked ambulance from the service exit. Logan, Lily, and Evelyn burst through the door, and Lawson told them to get in the damn car. Logan didn't argue, and he lifted Lily into the back seat and slid in next to her, while Evelyn jumped into the passenger side. More men were running from the hospital entrance, but Lawson didn't stalk them. As they sped out of the parking lot, the patrol car screeched away from the curb, and a bullet hit the back bumper. The last thing Logan saw in his side mirror were two black SUVs pulling onto the road behind them. The chase had just begun. They had been driving for 20 minutes before Lawson finally spoke. They knew she was here, he muttered, his jaw clenched on the steering wheel. They came in quickly. They knew exactly where to go to erase the records. This isn't some amateur operation, Evelyn exhaled while looking at Lily in the. Logan carefully watched the girl, she was too quiet. Lily, he asked gently, do you know who they are? Her small hands tugged at her sweater sleeves, and she looked away. They took us, she whispered. Lawson looked in the rearview mirror and saw other kids. Lily nodded slowly. There were other kids. Evelyn's breath caught. I don't know how many. Lily's voice was barely audible, but I wasn't the only one. Lawson and Logan exchanged looks. This just got a hell of a lot bigger. The cabin was small and hidden in a thicket of trees about 30 miles outside of town. It had been a hunting lodge that had been abandoned for a long time, and the walls were covered in faded wallpaper that was coming off the edges. It wasn't safe or comfortable, but it was off the grid, and that was all that mattered right now. Lawson turned off the headlights as he pulled the patrol car onto the overgrown driveway. The tires crunched over gravel, and the engine cut out as he put the car in park. Logan looked at Lily in the back seat. She hadn't said a word since the hospital. She was curled up, her hands on her knees, and staring at nothing. Evelyn looked at Lawson and asked, how long can we stay here before they find us? Lawson laughed. That depends. They erased her hospital records in minutes, which means they have deep connections. But the longer we stay hidden, the better chance we have to figure out who's behind this. Logan opened the back door and reached for Lily. She flinched and backed away at first, but he kept his voice steady. Come with me. After a long pause, she nodded and let him go. As they hurried toward the cabin, the air was thick with the smell of damp pine. Lawson unlocked the door by stepping in first, clearing the space with his gun drawn out of habit. Logan wasn't sure whether to be relieved or worried when nothing seemed to have been disturbed, no footprints, no signs of movement, so they were alone. It was hours before Lily spoke. She was sitting at the kitchen table in an oversized hoodie that swallowed her small frame, her fingers. Lawson was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, and Evelyn was sitting across from her. Logan was to her right, and the only sound that broke the silence was the crackling of the fire in the old stone fireplace. Finally, Lily whispered, they called it the cold room. Logan stopped, and Evelyn leaned in a little to ask, where were you taken? Lily nodded, there were other kids there. Some of them woke up after surgery, and some didn't. Lawson's face darkened as he asked, how many? Lily hesitated, her small hands curling into fists. I don't know a lot of cold room. Logan's chest felt heavy, and Lily's voice got even softer. They said we were special, they said. Evelyn looked at Lawson and said, special? How? Lily's lips pressed together, they took things from us. There was silence, and then Lawson muttered, Jesus Christ. Lawson went outside and pulled out his phone. As he leaned against the patrol car, the cold night air bit into his skin, but he didn't notice. He needed answers, so he called Detective R. Mendez, an old co-worker from the Human Trafficking Task Force. The second ring was answered right away by Lawson. "We've got a problem." Lawson then asked, "Have you ever heard of a place called the Cold Room?" There was a short pause, and then Lawson asked, "Where did you hear that name?" Mendez was quiet for a long time before finally saying, "That's one of the rumored sites for black market organ harvesting." They'd been after this ring for years, but there are no addresses or paper trails, just whispers about kids going missing and then showing up. Lawson gritted his teeth and asked, "What else are they up to?" Mendez replied, "Not just local traffickers, we're talking big money buyers from Europe, the Middle East, and even China." Lawson looked at the cabin and clenched his jaw. "If that girl escaped," Mendez said, "they're not just coming for her, they're coming to cut off all loose ends inside." Evelyn was testing Lily with the little medical gear she had in her bag, a portable scatter, a few blood test kits, and a basic force setup, but it would have. She took a sample and scanned the results on her tablet. Logan saw her face change from interested to worried. "What is it?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated, then moved the screen so he could see. "There's something in her blood." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet. It's a chemical compound I don't recognize." Lawson sat down just in time to hear that. "What are we looking at?" Evelyn asked. "Whatever this is, it was meant to keep her compliant." Lawson rubbed his temple. "It's not just any street drug, it's pharmaceutical grade, which means that someone with serious medical knowledge did it." Logan exhaled her sharply. "They drugged her up and cut her open like cattle." Evelyn's voice was rough, "And we don't know what else they did to her." Lily was staring at the floor and not saying a word. Evelyn softened her voice and asked, "Sweetheart, do you remember if they gave you medicine before the surgery?" Lily nodded. "They said it would make me feel better." Logan, who was tired, clenched his fists. Lawson turned back to Evelyn and asked, "Can you figure out exactly what's in her system?" Evelyn said, "I'll need more equipment, but I can do it." Lawson let out a sigh of relief. "We need that answer," he said, "because whatever was in Lily's blood wasn't just to keep her unconscious, it was something more." Evelyn looked at the test results again, her jaw tightened. Logan saw what she hesitated, then looked up. "Lily wasn't meant to escape," she said. "But there's another compound in here, a secondary one, that's a slow-release toxin." Logan caught his breath. "You're saying she wasn't supposed to wake up?" Evelyn confirmed that this was meant to kill her. Those words hit hard. Lily was supposed to disappear. Her body was never meant to be found. They weren't just taking organs, they were erasing evidence. If that was true, and every other missing child had been given the same slow-acting poison, then Lily wasn't just lucky, she was a miracle. The people who took her were eager to finish the job. Sheriff Lawson was sitting at the dining table with a laptop open and a file spread out in front of him. The blue light from the screen lit up his face as he scanned records and cross-referenced names for missing persons reports. Dr. Parker was sitting next to him and still analyzing the last of Lily's blood work on her portable scatter. Logan turned to them and said, "We need to find out where she came from. Someone has to be looking for her." Lawson barely looked up. "We're working on it, but so far no one's reported a missing child who fits her description." Evelyn sighed and rubbed her temples. "That doesn't make sense. A little girl doesn't just disappear without anyone looking for her." Lawson pressed a few keys and scrolled through the database. If her family wasn't already taken care of, silence fell over the room. Evelyn asked what he meant. Lawson leaned back and folded his arms. If she was supposed to disappear completely, then maybe the people who did this didn't just erase her, maybe they erased her family as well. Logan got a chill at the thought of it, so he stepped closer and said, "We're not just looking for a missing person, we're looking for someone who was buried before anyone could start asking questions." Lawson grimaced and said, "That's exactly what I'm saying." 2 hours later, Lawson sat forward in his chair, eyes locked on the screen. He got something. Logan and Evelyn moved in to look. On the screen was the name Olivia Dawson, mother of the deceased daughter, who was presumed dead. Lawson's face darkened as he said, "Here, Olivia Dawson." Dawson was pronounced dead 2 months after Lily went missing, and her body was never found. Evelyn shook her head and said, "That's not a coincidence at all." Lawson opened the coroner's report and saw that the official cause of death was listed as suicide. Logan laughed. Lawson agreed. She went missing first, and a week later, her car was found abandoned near a bridge outside of town. There were no witnesses, no security footage, and no follow-up investigations. If she did try to expose it, someone made sure she never had the chance. Logan clenched his fists and said, "We need to find out who took her organ, and then we'll find the people who are behind this." Sheriff Dante Lawson was sitting across from Dr. Henry Vaugh in a dimly lit diner, just outside the county lines. Vaugh was a man in his late 50s, with deep lines on his face for making bad decisions his whole life. He held a cigarette in trembling fingers, and the ash was barely sticking to the paper. "You used to work underground," Lawson said in a low voice. "People on the black market for organs were involved." Vaugh laughed, but didn't deny it. He took a slow drag on his cigarette before exhaling. "Sheriff, that's all people needed help, and they paid well for it," he said. That help included cutting organs out of kidnapped kids. Vaughn's hand shook slightly as he stubbed his cigarette into the ashtray. "I never worked on kids," he said, his eyes darting to the exit. "Not directly, but you knew about it," Lawson said. "You knew about her." He slid a picture of Lily across the table. At one point, Vaugh hesitated and swallowed hard. "I didn't do the surgery," he finally admitted, "but I saw her." "She was at the clinic where she wasn't supposed to be," Lawson asked. "Was she a donor for?" The older man laughed bitterly. "That's the thing about this business, Sheriff. You don't ask too many questions if you want to stay alive." Lawson pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and put it next to the cigarette tray. "This is a subpoena," he said. "Please cooperate, and I might be able to keep you out of a federal indictment." Vaugh looked at the paper for a long time and then sighed. "Have you ever heard of the Whitmore Foundation?" Lawson asked. "They run hospitals, fund medical research, and they also fund something else," Vaugh said with a grimace. "They fund selective high-end transplants for people who don't want to wait in line for a donor." Lawson's stomach turned. He had always thought that the black market was bigger than a few bad surgeons, but this was a whole system set up to give organs to the rich while children were killed. "That's all I'm saying, Sheriff. If I were you, I'd leave this right away before you end up like the last guy who got too close." Lawson's eyes got darker. "Who?" Vaugh asked. "Lily's mother back at the safe house." Logan paced near the window, his fingers tapping restlessly against the frame. Evelyn sat at the dining table looking through a medical database on her laptop while Lily colored quietly on the couch. "Something's not adding up," Logan said. Evelyn didn't look up what part Olive. "Angry," he said. "Lily's mother Olivia Dawson was declared dead 2 months after Lily went missing, but no one ever found her body." "Now," Evelyn frowned and said, "that doesn't sound like someone who was ready to disappear." Logan nodded and asked, "What if she didn't die? What if they took her because she was too much of a problem?" Evelyn exhaled. "If she's still alive, she might know exactly who was behind this." Lily looked up from her drawing. "Mommy tried to stop them," Logan's breath caught. "What do you mean?" The little girl hesitated and then went back to drawing. "She said the bad guys were scared and that she was going to tell someone." Logan clenched his fists and said, "We find Olivia. We find the people who took Lily." Evelyn shut down her laptop with a snap. "We need to find out who Lily's kidney went to. If someone powerful was involved, then we have leverage." Lawson laughed. "You should say that." He threw a file onto the table. The recipient was Silas Whitmore, as in the Whitmore Foundation. Logan's heart rate went up. That's the link. Evelyn turned pale, and if Whitmore was willing to buy an organ from a child, He won't stop now. Lily curled up on the couch and hugged her knees. He's one of the men who came into the room, she whispered. Silence fell over the room. It didn't take long to find information on Silas Whitmore, a billionaire philanthropist who was widely seen as a champion of healthcare reform, but he had a history of. He had end-stage kidney failure, so there were no medical records about his recent surgery. Evelyn murmured as she read the reports. There was no mention of a transplant in any of his hospital records. Lawson rubbed his temples. That's because he didn't get one the legal way. Logan cracked his knuckles. Then let's put some pressure on him. Lawson smirked. That's my kind of thinking. Evelyn hesitated. If we do this wrong, he'll bury us. Lawson quickly picked up the phone and said, I'll pull some strings to see if I can get surveillance on him. If Whitmore thinks he's untouchable, let's remind him that he's not. Lily shifted nervously. Are the bad guys coming back? Logan crouching in front of her. No, sweetheart, he promised, because this time we're going after them within hours. Lawson got confirmation that Whitmore's estate had increased security because he knows we're coming. Evelyn shut the laptop and said, then we don't. Lawson raised an eyebrow at the idea of just walking into a press conference and dropping this in someone's lap. Evelyn said that we should leak it to the right people first, like law enforcement, medical ethics boards, and investigative journalists. Once it's out there, he won't be able to control it. Logan let out a breath of air, and Lawson smiled. Then we'll be ready. As Logan stepped outside to get some air, his phone vibrated with a message from a blocked number. If you think Whitmore is the top, you're wrong. He looked at the screen and felt his stomach twist. They were getting close, but now he knew the ring was bigger than one man, and they weren't done hunting yet. Sheriff Dante Lawson's office was quiet. The only sounds were the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the rustling of papers from time to time. Logan sat across from Lawson, his jaw tight with anger. Evelyn Parker was standing by the window, scrolling through medical reports on her phone. This isn't just about Whitmore, Logan said, breaking the silence. Lawson exhaled. Then we make them show their face. Evelyn looked up and saw that Lawson had tacked a folder on his desk. We bait them. Logan's brows furrowed as he asked, using what? Lawson's face darkened. Not what, who? The weight of that word settled over them all, and they knew who he meant. Lily, Evelyn whispered. Lawson, they think she's still missing. We let them think she's dead. Make it look like their operation got sloppy and someone found a body. Logan stiffened. That's a hell of a gamble. Lawson explained that if we leak the news through the right channels, Whitmore and his staff will freak out, and the buyers who use the system will want to know for sure that their pipeline isn't being hacked. This means that they'll call their suppliers. Logan sat back and processed. You think we can follow the trail? We won't just follow it. We're going to infiltrate it. By morning, a fake coroner's report about the death of an unidentified young girl was going around in underground channels. Discovered near where Logan had found Lily. The details weren't clear enough to make both traffickers and buyers suspicious. Now they just had to wait. It didn't take long for Lawson's contacts to pick up on rumors of a meeting to hire new people who were willing to move goods. We go in, Lawson said, sliding 2 fake IDs across the table toward Logan. Low-level recruits, don't be heroes, play dumb and eager, and we find out where these kids are being held. Logan picked up one of the IDs and read the. Lawson put his hand in his pocket and said, not bad, you'll get used to it. Now let's get moving, we don't get a second chance at this. Evelyn wasn't happy about it. You're both walking into a death trap. We don't have a choice. Logan met her eyes. You'll come back, right? Lily pulled on Logan's sleeve. You bet. He knelt down and put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You bet, she said, but he knew there were no guarantees. The meeting point was in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people disappeared. Without a trace, Logan and Lawson walked in separately, blending in with the small group of men who had already gathered inside. Some of them looked like minor offenders with debts to pay and no other way out, while others looked like they belonged. A man in a gray suit walked up to the group and looked at them with cold, judging eyes. "This is not a game," he said in a voice that indicated understanding. "Discretion, we move product, we don't ask questions, and we don't make mistakes." A murmur of agreement went through the room. Lawson and Logan pecked. The man's eyes lingered on Logan for a beat too long. "What's your background?" he asked. "Freight driver. I know how to get things where they need to go without being seen." The man seemed to think about this for a moment, then turned to Lawson and you. Lawson's tone was grumpy security, former military, that seemed to satisfy him. "Bid we need people who don't panic under pressure." He nodded toward a door at the back of the warehouse and said, "Step inside." The man and Logan exchanged a subtle glance. Lawson and Logan were in the back room, which led to a hidden loading dock where 3 unmarked vans were waiting. "We're moving tonight," the suited announced. "New inventory means transport. You're either in or you're out." Logan kept his cool. "Where are we taking it?" the man asked with a thin smile. "Not your concern," Lawson said. "We need to know the route if we're driving." "You don't want us making wrong turns, do you?" The man looked at Logan for a long time and then smiled. He handed Lawson a burner phone and said, "You'll get the." When Logan and Lawson got into one of the vans, the doors slammed shut behind them, and Logan felt the weight of what they were about to find for the first time. The van then started moving. The drive was long and winding through back roads that had probably never seen police. Logan kept track of the turns in his head while Lawson sat next to him and checked the burner phone. There was a single message: "Drop at Site B." 30 minutes later, they arrived at the facility, which was tucked away in A. There were so many armed guards at the entrance that the outside of the building, which looked like a storage facility, told a different story. Logan felt a chill down his spine as a metal door slid open and one of the guards motioned them inside. Lawson whispered, "Stick to the plant, get inside, find proof, get out." Logan exhaled, "Let's do this." As they stepped through the doorway, they realized they were walking straight into hell. The air was sterile and buzzing with a low sound of. Logan and Lawson walked down the cold industrial hallway, their boots making no noise on the smooth concrete floor. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell of antiseptic and something darker and more human. In the distance, a high-pitched scream reminded them that they were running out of time. Lawson looked over his shoulder and spoke quietly, "Parker's outside, watching our feed. As soon as we get confirmation, she calls it in." Logan nodded, but his eyes were still closed. There were numbers on the doors in the hallway, but no names or identities. "This is where they keep them," he muttered. Lawson pulled out the stolen key card and swiped it at the first door. The lock clicked open, and inside were a row of cots with kids who were barely conscious, some hooked up to IVs, and others too weak to react. Logan's hands were curled into fists, and one of the boys spoke up in a barely audible whisper. "Help us." Lawson took a step forward, but Logan grabbed his arm. "We need to be smart," Logan murmured. "If we get to the head of the snake first," Lawson sharply exhaled, but he knew Logan was right. "Stay awake," he told the boy in a firm voice. The kid nodded weakly, his eyes glassy but determined. They slipped back out and quietly closed the door behind them. "Let's find the jerks running this place," Logan said in a steel voice. "This is it," Lawson muttered. Logan swiped the key card, and the door slid open. In the operating room, there were bright overhead lights, stainless steel surgical tables, and medical equipment humming in the background. The surgeon, Dr. Victor Sloan, barely looked up as he moved his gloved hands carefully over a patient. Next to him stood a child and a man in an expensive suit named Silas Whitmore, who was the buyer. Security started moving before Logan could blink, and Lawson fired first. 2 guards fell before they even had a chance to react. Lawson barked and aimed his gun at Sloan, but the surgeon didn't react. "You're making a mistake." Flinch casually took off his gloves. Logan stepped forward and said, "Doc, you made the mistake of thinking that no one would find this place." Whitmore changed his tone, looking more annoyed than scared. "I assume this is the part where you lecture us about morality," he asked. Logan's lip curled. "This is the part where we end you." The tension in the room was razor sharp, and Sloane stepped away from the operating table to the side. "Understand, do you?" Logan lost his cool and grabbed the surgeon by the collar and slammed him against a steel cabinet. "Enlighten me," he demanded. Sloane barely flinched. "This isn't some back alley operation. This is bigger than you than any of you." "Yeah," Lawson growled. "Well, you're about to get a lot smaller. You're disrupting a system that serves a very specific clientele," Whitmore laughed. "I know the rich, the powerful, and the untouchable." Logan pushed Sloane harder against the wall. "Yeah, I know them." Whitmore smiled. Parker's sharp voice on the radio said, "The beds are set up and they're moving in." Logan grinned and said, "You were saying the first flashbang went off outside the facility." Chaos broke out. Lawson killed another guard while Logan held Sloane tightly and dragged him toward the exit. "You're going to testify." Sloane glared at him and said, "You think you've won?" Logan pulled him close and said, "Yeah, I do." Whitmore was already backing toward the exit. "I can make you rich," Logan said, breathless. Lawson pointed his gun at the man's chest, "And you don't know who you are." The door flew open, and federal agents swarmed in seconds later. The room was locked, and Sloane and Whitmore were forced to their knees with their hands zip-tied behind their backs. The air outside the building smelled like smoke and antiseptic, and the flashing red and blue lights from the convoy of police cars cast long shadows over the gravel lot. Officers moved in organized chaos, taking notes on evidence, escorting suspects into waiting SUVs, and giving medical instructions. Logan stood next to the ambulance, where Lily was wrapped in a blanket. Despite the warmth, Lily's small frame was still shaking, and Dr. Parker knelt next to her to do one last check on her vital signs. Sheriff Lawson was talking to the lead federal agent, but Logan already knew what he was saying. He was confirming that the nightmare they had just been through was real, that the men responsible were in handcuffs, and that this was far from over. Some had escaped, but that reality lingered in the back of their minds. Logan's mind was bothering him even as he felt relieved. He looked at Lily. Her eyes were fixed on everything, the police, the flashing lights, and the faraway figures of other children being rescued and carried to safety. But her grip on Logan's sleeve was firm, as if she wasn't sure she wouldn't disappear again. "They won't get you," Logan murmured, crouching next to her. Lily didn't say anything, but she leaned against him just a little. It was the closest thing to trust she'd shown him since the nightmare began. Sheriff Lawson walked away from the federal agents and went up to Logan and Parker. He ran his hand over his tired face, and he said that Sloane and Whitmore, along with most of the security team we caught inside, would be facing federal charges. But Logan pressed, knowing that there was always a but. Lawson let out a sigh of relief, realizing that some of them had gotten away. High-ups, financial backers, and those who planned the operations from afar had hit their tracks before we even caught them. "Breached the building," Logan tensed his jaw and said, "So they're still out there lost?" Nodded, "Yeah, and you can bet they're already working on rebuilding." This was just one part of a bigger machine. Dr. Parker looked between the two men and said, "We have to keep going. We can't let this die in a legal battle. This needs to stay in the public eye." Lawson met her gaze and said, "I'm not stopping. I've already asked for the task force to stay open. There are still other kids and families who never got answers." Lawson was stubborn and relentless in a way that only someone who had seen real evil could be, but Logan felt like the fight was different now, that it wasn't just about shutting down the network, it was about Lily. A week later, Logan sat in the waiting room of a small clinic while Dr. Parker ran another set of tests on Lily. It wasn't a hospital because there was too much of a chance that someone would be tracking them there, but it was safe, quiet, and most importantly, anonymous. He leaned forward and rubbed his hands together as he spoke. He could hear faint murmurs coming from the exam room, but he didn't pay much attention because he had been focused on Lily, keeping her safe and making sure she never had to feel like prey again. The door opened, and Parker walked out. She looked tired, but relieved that she was stable. Parker sat down next to him and said, "Physically, she's healing well from the surgery." It will take time, but she's strong and mentally. Logan asked. Parker sighed. That's harder to say. She's talking more. While looking at the door, Logan nodded and asked, what happens now? Parker looked at him and asked, she doesn't have any known family now that her mother's gone. She'll need protection. Logan frowned and said, witness protection. Parker thought about it for a moment and said, that's one option, but she's just a kid. She needs more than just moving. She needs stability. Logan's throat tightened. He knew what she was saying before she even said it. She trusts you. Parker went on. I'm not a parrot, he swallowed. Parker gave him a small, tired smile. Neither was I when I started taking care of people who needed me. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be there. Logan slowly let out a breath. His mind was racing. Could he do this? Could he give this kid what she needed? The door creaked open, and Lily stood there, her small frame silhouetted in the dim hallway light. Logan's voice was soft and hesitant. Yeah, kid, she said. She hesitated, then stepped forward, holding something. She held out a small, battered teddy bear for him and whispered, for you. Logan took it, and his chest tightened. He didn't know what to say, but it didn't matter. Lily had already made up her mind. A month later, Logan sat on the porch of a small cabin and watched Lily play with a stray dog that had gotten on the property. They had found a place off the grid, away from prying eyes, where she could have something that almost seemed like a normal childhood. LW checked in from time to give him updates on the investigations, arrests, and names of people who had been charged. Parker made sure Lily had everything she needed for medical care and kept track of her recovery while Logan was still trying to figure it out. Lily ran up the porch steps, out of breath, but smiling. It was the first time he'd seen her smile without fear. You saved me, she said, looking up at him. No, kid, he said, ruffling her hair. You saved yourself, she replied. For the first time in a long time, Logan let himself believe that maybe this was the start of. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you liked the story, please press the like button and follow for more.